Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. Claire could feel her heart pounding against her ribcage as she stood outside the glass doors of Newman Enterprises, holding her young son's small hand tightly in hers. The boy's fingers were warm, innocent, curious, but she could feel her own hand trembling. It wasn't just the nerves of walking into the powerful Newman Tower, it was the weight of what she was about to do. She had gone over it again and again in her head during sleepless nights, trying to figure out if there was ever going to be a right moment. But the truth was, there never would be. Secrets had a way of poisoning every day they stayed hidden, and she had carried hers for too long. Claire took a deep breath, bent down to her son's level, and whispered that everything was going to be okay. He looked up at her with wide eyes, trusting her completely, and that simple look almost shattered her resolve. But she couldn't back out now. Victoria needed to know the truth, all of it. Walking through the lobby felt like stepping into another world. Polished marble floors, sharp lines of power and prestige, employees rushing by with files and phones in hand. Everyone here belonged to Victor Newman's empire, and Claire knew she was an outsider. Yet, this was where her life had been leading. Every lie, every mistake, every attempt to rewrite her own history had brought her to this moment, and she almost couldn't believe she was still standing. When the elevator doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored surface. Her eyes looked tired, worn from years of carrying burdens she had no one to share with. Her son tugged on her sleeve, asking in his sweet, unfiltered voice if his grandma was nice. Claire's throat tightened, because how could she explain to a child the tangled web of hurt, betrayal, and complicated love that made up the Newman family? She simply nodded and said that Victoria was going to be very happy to meet him. The office door was slightly ajar when she arrived, and she heard Victoria's voice inside, low and commanding as she spoke with an assistant. The familiarity of it made Claire's knees weak. She had dreamed about this encounter so many times, imagined scenarios where Victoria would slam the door in her face, or where she would wrap her in an unexpected hug. But the reality was a blur of emotions as she knocked gently and stepped inside. Victoria turned, her eyes sharp and questioning at first, before softening with surprise. "Claire," she said, her tone a mixture of curiosity and caution. And then her gaze shifted to the little boy clutching Claire's hand, hiding partly behind her legs. For a moment, silence hung in the room like an anchor. Claire could feel her chest rising and falling too quickly as she tried to find her voice. She introduced her son with a trembling whisper, watching as Victoria blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was seeing. The air shifted, it wasn't just a casual meeting anymore. It was the collision of past choices and the innocence of a child who had no idea of the storm swirling around him. Victoria slowly stepped forward, her voice unusually gentle as she asked the boy his name. He answered shyly, and Victoria's lips curved into the faintest smile. That one gesture, the softness in Victoria's eyes, was almost Claire's undoing. She felt her throat close up as emotions threatened to spill, but she had to keep going. She knew this wasn't just about introductions. She hadn't brought her son here only for Victoria to meet him. She had come because the truth had been buried too long, and now it was clawing its way to the surface. Her secrets weren't the kind that could stay hidden forever, and if she didn't confess now, the consequences would only grow worse. She sat down with her son on the couch in the office while Victoria remained standing, crossing her arms, sensing there was more coming. Claire clasped her hands together, took a shaky breath, and began to speak. Her words came haltingly at first, like broken glass being pulled from a wound, but once they started, they wouldn't stop. She talked about the past, about choices she made when she was lost, vulnerable, desperate for love and acceptance. She spoke of betrayals, of manipulation, of things she had done and things that had been done to her. At times her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue, because Victoria deserved the whole truth. The boy sat quietly, not fully understanding, but holding onto his mother's hand as though sensing how much she needed it. With every revelation, Claire felt a piece of herself being stripped away, raw and exposed. Her eyes filled with tears. She kept trying to blink back, but eventually they spilled freely down her cheeks. She could barely see Victoria's expression anymore through the blur, and that scared her even more. Finally, Claire reached the part she had been dreading most, the part where she admitted the deepest, darkest secret she had carried all these years. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling so violently she could hardly form the words. When they finally left her lips, she broke. Her whole body shook with sobs she couldn't control, the dam of years of guilt and silence crashing all at once. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling, her son's small fingers patting her arm as though to comfort her. She couldn't even look at Victoria, couldn't face the judgment she feared would be in her eyes. For a moment, it felt like she had destroyed everything, that this confession would tear apart any chance of peace. But then, through her tears, she heard movement. She forced herself to look up, and what she saw was not coldness, but conflict. Victoria's expression was complicated, torn between anger, hurt, and something softer, something almost maternal. She was silent for a long moment, and Claire thought the weight of that silence might crush her. Then Victoria spoke, her voice low but steady, asking if everything Claire had just said was true. Claire could only nod, tears still streaming, unable to trust her voice. And in that moment, something shifted between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. A shared understanding of pain, of mistakes, of family ties that could never fully be severed, no matter how much damage had been done. The quiet hum of the car engine was the only sound that accompanied Claire and her son on the journey into a past she had tried for so long to outrun. The landscape outside the window blurred, a smear of green and concrete that mirrored the swirling, indistinct turmoil within her. She glanced at the boy in the rearview mirror, his face a perfect, innocent canvas yet to be scarred by the complicated truths of his lineage. He was the reason for this. The sole reason she had found the courage, or perhaps the desperation, to finally do what she had known, in the deepest recesses of her soul, she must one day do. This was not a visit, it was a pilgrimage to the epicenter of a lifelong earthquake, a seismic event that had shaped her entire existence from the shadows. She was going to the Abbott mansion. She was going to see Victoria Newman. The weight of the secrets she carried felt like a physical presence in the passenger seat, a malevolent specter that had haunted her every step, every decision, every stolen moment of joy. For years, she had constructed a life on a foundation of half-truths and deliberate omissions, a fragile structure designed to protect her child from the storm she knew was inevitable. But storms have a way of arriving uninvited, and the winds of fate, of past mistakes, and of the relentless pursuit of truth by the powerful Newman family, had begun to howl, threatening to tear down everything she had built. The facade was cracking, and rather than wait for it to shatter and injure those she loved most, she had chosen to dismantle it herself, piece by painful piece. Pulling up to the grand, imposing estate, Claire felt a wave of nausea so potent she had to grip the steering wheel to steady herself. This house was not just a building, it was a symbol of everything she had been denied, everything she had been taught to resent, and yet everything she had come, in a twisted way, to understand as her true north. The Newman family was a force of nature, and she had been a mere leaf caught in their hurricane for decades. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart, she unbuckled her seatbelt and then her son's, her hands trembling as she smoothed down his hair. "We're going to see someone very important, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she could not name, a terrifying cocktail of fear, hope, and profound sorrow. The walk to the front door was the longest of her life. Each step was a lifetime of wondering, of hiding, of looking over her shoulder. The door swung open before she could even raise her hand to the bell, and there stood Victoria Newman. Not as a corporate titan, not as a formidable adversary, but as a woman in her own home, her expression one of guarded curiosity that quickly shifted to a dawning, unsettling recognition. Victoria's eyes, so like her own in their intensity, flickered from Claire's terrified face to the small boy clinging to her leg, and a frown of confusion creased her brow. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with the caution of someone accustomed to unexpected, and often unwelcome, surprises. The grandeur of the foyer seemed to swallow them whole. Claire stood, feeling small and insignificant amidst the evidence of the Newman wealth and power, a stark contrast to the life of quiet modesty she had carved out for herself and her son. The air was thick with unspoken history. This was the moment. There was no turning back. The words stuck in her throat, a tangled knot of confession and apology. She gently urged her son to look at a beautiful vase on a nearby table, a feeble attempt to distract him from the emotional tsunami that was about to break. "Ms. Newman." "Victoria," Claire began, her voice a fragile thread. "My name is Claire. But you might have known my mother. You might have known her very well." She paused, watching as Victoria's frown deepened, her mind clearly racing through the archives of her past. "My mother worked for your family a long time ago. She was devoted to your father. Too devoted." Victoria's posture shifted from curious to defensive, a subtle straightening of the spine that spoke of a woman preparing for a fight. "Many people have worked for my family over the years. I'm not sure She was obsessed, Claire interrupted, the word bursting forth with a painful urgency. "She believed they were meant to be together. She believed that your mother was the only thing standing in their way." The air in the room grew cold and still. Victoria said nothing, but her eyes were locked on Claire's, commanding her to continue. This was the point of no return. Claire took another ragged breath, the oxygen failing to reach her lungs. Her name was Eve. Eve Howard. The name landed in the quiet room with the force of a detonation. Victoria's face paled, the blood draining away as decades-old memories, long buried under the strata of business deals and family crises, were violently exhumed. Eve. The woman whose dangerous infatuation with Victor Newman had torn their family apart, who had been responsible for untold pain and manipulation. A woman Victoria had tried to forget. "What does this have to do with you?" Victoria asked, her voice low and dangerously calm. Claire's eyes filled with tears that she no longer had the strength to hold back. "She was my mother. And her obsession, it didn't end with her. It became my inheritance." The story then began to pour out of her, a torrent of long-suppressed truth. She spoke of a childhood in the shadow of a bitter, vengeful woman who spoke of the Newmans not as people, but as obstacles and prizes. She spoke of being taught to hate them, to see Victoria not as a person, but as a symbol of privilege, the daughter who had everything even Claire had been denied. But then, the narrative twisted, taking a darker, more horrifying turn. Claire's voice broke as she confessed the central, devastating secret she had been groomed to keep. Her plan was never just to hurt your family from the outside. She wanted to place me inside. To infiltrate. To make me a part of your world so I could eventually tear it down. She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to her son, who was still innocently captivated by the shiny objects in the room, blissfully unaware that his mother's world was collapsing around him. "There was a baby," Claire whispered, the words almost inaudible. "Your baby. The one everyone believed was stillborn." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was 25 years in the making. That loss was a ghost that had never left her, a pain so profound and private that few dared to speak of it. "He wasn't stillborn," Claire said, the confession tearing from her soul like a piece of itself. "My mother, she was there. She had help from someone inside the hospital. She took him. She told me he had died, but she took him and she gave him to me. She raised him as my brother. For years, I believed he was my brother. It was only later, as her bitterness consumed her completely, that she told me the truth. She told me he was my weapon. The ultimate tool to destroy you. To make you suffer the loss of a child while he was right under your nose, being raised by her daughter. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of Claire's weeping. Victoria stood frozen, a statue of shock and dawning, agonizing comprehension. Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears of her own, slowly traveled from Claire's devastated face to the little boy. He turned then, sensing the shift in the room's energy, and looked at the two women with his wide, curious eyes. In that moment, Victoria saw it. She saw the faint, undeniable echo of her own features in the shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw. She saw the ghost of her brother Nick in his smile. She saw her father's stubborn set of the chin. She saw her son. The revelation was a physical blow. Victoria staggered back a step, her hand clutching at her chest as if to keep her heart from breaking out of it. The son she had mourned for a quarter of a century was not dead. He had lived. He had grown into a man, had a child of his own. And this woman, this broken, weeping woman standing before her, was both the keeper of her son and the daughter of the woman who had stolen him. The layers of betrayal, loss, and shocking, miraculous discovery were too immense to process. It was then that Claire's composure shattered completely. The dam broke, and the tears she had held back for a lifetime, for herself, for the brother she never knew she had, for the son who deserved a truth she could scarcely bear to tell, came in an uncontrollable flood. She fell to her knees, not in supplication, but in utter exhaustion, the weight of her mother's sins and her own complicity in the silence finally crushing her. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, the words muffled by her hands. "I was so afraid. For so long. I didn't know how to tell him. I didn't know how to tell you. I just wanted to protect him from all of it, from the hate, from the pain. But he deserves to know where he comes from. He deserves to know his family. And you deserve to know the truth. I am so sorry for the pain my mother caused. And for my silence." Victoria watched her, her own tears now tracing silent paths down her cheeks. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a maelstrom of other emotions, a fury so white-hot it threatened to incinerate her grief, a compassion for the broken woman at her feet who was as much a victim of Eve's madness as anyone, and a yearning, a primal, maternal pull toward the little boy who was her grandson. The secrets were all out now, lying on the floor between them like shattered glass. They could never be gathered up and hidden away again. The truth had been spoken, and it had changed everything irrevocably. In that raw, emotionally eviscerated space, the past and the present collided with brutal force. The intricate, decades-spanning plot of a vengeful woman had finally reached its culmination not in the destruction she had intended, but in a scene of devastating confession and heartbreaking revelation. Claire had unburdened her soul, transferring the weight of her secrets onto the shoulders of the woman most affected by them. She had brought a son to meet his grandmother, not as a happy introduction, but as the living, breathing evidence of a crime against nature and family. And as she knelt on the cold, hard floor, weeping for all that had been lost and all that was yet to come, the first fragile, painful threads of a new, unimaginably complex future began to weave themselves together from the ruins of the past. The road ahead would be fraught with pain, with legal battles, with explaining the unexplainable to a child, and with navigating a relationship forged in trauma. But it was a road that now, for the first time, was built on the solid, unshakable ground of truth.